In 1969, Congress wrote a rule that would have forced wealthy donors to actually give their money to charity, and someone removed it before the bill was signed. No official record names who. By the end of this, you'll understand how $234 billion in so-called charitable money sits frozen right now legally, while the people who parked it there already claimed every dollar in tax deductions. Donor-advised funds. Most people have never heard of them. That's not an accident. Here is what they look like. A wealthy person writes a check, say $500,000, to an account held by Fidelity or Schwab or Vanguard. They claim the full tax deduction that year. The money is legally a charitable donation, except it doesn't go to charity. It sits in an investment account. It earns returns. It grows. And under current law, there is no deadline, none, by which it ever has to leave. The account is called a donor-advised fund. And the rules governing it were decided in a single week in October 1969. Congress was finishing the Tax Reform Act. Its target was private foundations, the Rockefeller family, the Ford family, the generational dynasties that had spent decades using charity accounts as personal holding companies, parking wealth, avoiding estate taxes, paying relatives lavish salaries through nonprofit shells. Senator Russell long pushed hard for a mandatory payout rule. Every charitable vehicle would be required to distribute at least 6% of its assets every year. Real money, real charities, a real schedule. The provision made it into the draft. Then, in the final days of negotiation, a closed conference between House and Senate leadership, donor-advised funds were quietly carved out. No floor, no deadline, no required distribution. The 6% rule applied to private foundations. It did not apply to the accounts that would eventually become DAFs. The carve-out is 4 sentences long. It sits on page 212 of the final conference report. Most members of Congress never read it. The Treasury Department acknowledged the gap. In 1969, they published guidance noting that DAFs were a distinct vehicle with no payout requirements and flagged the issue for future rulemaking. That rulemaking never came. The IRS revisited DAF regulations in 1999. They proposed new rules. A public comment period opened. Fidelity Charitable, Schwab Charitable, and Vanguard Charitable, which by then managed billions in these accounts, each submitted formal objections. The proposed rules were withdrawn. In 2006, the Pension Protection Act gave DAFs their first formal legal definition. Congress debated mandatory payout requirements again. A 6% floor was proposed. It was removed before the final vote. Twice in 37 years, the payout requirement came to the floor. Twice it disappeared. Now watch what happens next. After 2006, donor-advised funds didn't just survive. They exploded. By 2012, Fidelity Charitable had surpassed United Way as the single largest recipient of charitable donations in the United States. Not a hospital, not a food bank, a financial holding account. By 2022, DAFs collectively held $234 billion in assets. That same year, researchers at Boston College published a 10-year analysis of 70,000 DAF accounts. 17% made zero grants, not slow grants, not reduced grants, zero. Money went in, the deduction was taken, nothing came out. Here is what makes that number impossible to dismiss. The donors who contributed to those accounts already received their full tax benefit. The deduction was real. The money left their taxable estate. As far as the IRS is concerned, the charitable act is complete. The charity never had to happen. And here's what makes the whole thing impossible. The door is locked from the inside. The law doesn't just allow this. It guarantees it. Once the money enters a donor-advised fund, the sponsoring institution has legal control. The donor advises, the institution decides, and there is no mechanism, none, that compels a payout. That is not an oversight. The 1969 carve-out, the 1999 withdrawal, the 2006 floor that vanished, each of those was a decision. A room where someone said, not yet. The accounts that grew most aggressively in the years after each failed reform were held at Fidelity Charitable, Schwab Charitable, and Vanguard Charitable. Those three institutions also manage the investment portfolios inside those same accounts and collect fees on every dollar that stays. There's a word for an arrangement where one party receives the tax benefit, the intended beneficiary receives nothing, and an intermediary collects fees on the idle balance indefinitely. Congress hasn't settled on that word yet. What they have settled on, an ordinary taxpayer cannot claim a charitable deduction and keep the money. If your check bounces, you lose the deduction. The transfer must be real, unless it goes to a donor-advised fund. At that point, the transfer is real enough for the IRS and frozen enough for the charity. The people using these accounts most aggressively are not hiding. Their names are in the donor files of every major DAF sponsor. Many sit on the boards of the same financial institutions managing those accounts. In 2024, two new proposals to impose payout minimums on donor-advised funds entered Congress. Both died in committee before a floor vote was ever scheduled. That is 5 reform attempts since 1969. 5. The money is still there. $234 billion, growing, legally charitable, under no obligation to reach a single cause. Someone decided that in 1969. Someone confirmed it in 1999. Someone confirmed it again in 2006 and again in 2024. What I cannot tell you is who made that call the first time, or whether anyone is still trying to find out.